Welcome back into another dive into my mind and how I created Fables of Refuge and what I wanted the world to be like. Like, oh, if I want a world where there's all these different people and most people get along, there's still going to be that element of people that are die-hard about the identity of their race. But they're not necessarily bad guys. You know, if you're raised in that, they might not know that what they're spewing is abhorrent. If the players want to get into that, they can. It exists. But I love that, you know, you got a turtle bartender in a place that's not necessarily right on the water, you know, in an inn that's owned by a halfling who is married to another male halfling, and they have an adopted half-elf daughter. These are things that happen on Refuge, and it's not abnormal. Like, that is not seen as strange. That's just like, well, yeah, there's people here. Because to me, that's an ideal that I think we should all strive for in real life, and I want to see that in my fantasy. When you're creating your world, when you're doing D&D, you know, you talk with your players about what kind of game do you want it to be. And I, in real life, abhor violence. I'm not a violent person. I see its uses for when we need it, but I don't think violence should ever be our go-to answer or should be first or should be even considered a lot of the time. In D&D, sometimes you got to draw out a sword and cut off a head.
Yeah.
But that's okay because it's not real. Mm-hmm. So I like that my fantasy violence isn't real. But there's elements of violence that I will not have in my game because it's uncomfortable. I don't think it adds anything to a story, particularly in D&D. But to me, like particularly in a D&D game where your players might not necessarily be actors, but even if they are, they're bringing a lot of their own emotions to the table and are really investing in their person, in their character. And if something in real life that's incredibly bothersome to you that you may be a victim of, or you may just you want nothing to do with happens in the game,
it can mess with you.
That can really mess with you. And I'd rather explore like, well, I'm more interested in this negative aspect of life with racism between cultures and deal with that in game than I am this other subject, which sexual violence is definitely one of. So I won't allow that in my game. If you want to allow that in your game, talk with your players. Same thing with romance. Some tables are not going to want any romance. Some tables may want a lot of romance. And you might want to know what type of game you want. I like roleplay, and I like puzzles and dungeon delving. So if my players want romance, I'm okay with romance at the table, romance with NPCs, romance between players, as long as everybody's on board. All that's fine. So you can do all these things in D&D. It dives right into the core of your game. And do you have violent gods? Do you have violent magic? Is magic that does necromancy physically tear the flesh of the person casting it? Like there's all sorts of details and how everything comes together with the game your players want to play and the game you're playing and are creating.
You successfully went into the weeds and then got out.
I did.
That being said, I don't know how we got in the weeds.
Yeah, I can meander. When you're creating your world, you got to think about these questions.
Yeah, whether they make you comfortable or not.
And so there's things I allow at the table and things I don't. That's one of them, but for good reason.
In Refuge, you have 3 main types of elves here that are connected to deities.
Right. That doesn't make them Aasimar. It doesn't make them tieflings. There are tieflings. There are Aasimar. They are offspring from interactions of gods. The elves are mortal races. They are incredibly long-lived. They may not die of old age, but they definitely can be killed. Half-elves can be half-orc, half-elf, half-halfling, half-elf, half and half. D&D, though, in the rulebook, half-elves are half-human, half-elf. I'm okay if a player wanted to explore what that means. So a player character, if they're half-elf, can then choose which lineage that elf is.
Right.
And then D&D allows, like, oh, half-elves get some choices in their character creation. So you can have this versus that. Like, it'll let you use your human blood to enhance your stats, or your elven blood to do this or that. So I've worked that mechanic so it can inform those things. Like character decisions informing your mechanical creation of the character, I think is way more interesting. Though otherwise is also fine too. Oh, I'm a half-orc, so it says this in the book, so I could be this, so that means I probably grew up like this or that. Like, it can affect it either way. I like character story informing your sheet than the sheet informing your character. I like it that way.
Okay.
I think that's more interesting for the player. They can dive into it better. A full-blooded elf that was raised by humans, so you might not have that connection to your heritage. and you might want to explore that as a character. So there's lots of options in Refuge, and tieflings in particular. No tiefling, as far as people know, which is a nice broad statement, no tiefling on Refuge is a first or second generation tiefling. They're not the immediate spawn of a devil and a person. They are of an infernal bloodline. And I think it was Volos's Guide to Monsters that put all 12 hells, gave them each a specific thing, which is great, because all those exist, all that evilness exists. And so tieflings are usually of fourth, fifth, or sixth generation tiefling. They're from a family that's all tieflings, or maybe tiefling and a human, or tiefling and an elf, or a half elf, or tiefling and an orc, or whatever, and then the offspring just expressed as tiefling because of the infernal nature. But they're also very special tieflings in Refuge. There was an event that happened that involved the tieflings, and then suddenly, for the past 50 years, a tiefling foundling, just a baby, just appears in people's homes. It just like one day you wake up and there's a tiefling baby in your house. And you might be a human, you could be an elf, you could be a dragonborn, and suddenly there's this tiefling baby. And it's like, oh, and these are referred to as the children of lost souls. This is common knowledge because it just happens.
Right.
Over the past 50 years has been happening. And so there are lots of tieflings who were raised not with other tieflings. That is like, leads them to be like, well, who am I? What does that mean for me? What does my bloodline mean? So that's the thing that happens on Refuge, is sometimes a tiefling baby is found. It's not common.
That's gnarly though.
Yeah, it's gnarly because it's like suddenly you have a baby. What do you do with it? Do you keep the baby? Do you kill the baby? Do you eat the baby? Do you use it in a ritual sacrifice? Do you find and give it to a temple to raise? That happens often. Do you find someone evil to sell it to? You know, like, well, you got a baby. A lot of potential there. Children of Lost Souls are something that I've created for Refuge. I created the event that happened. There's, which came out of necessity due to a circumstance in the game that I was like, I need to change up tieflings a little bit. And then I was like, oh, this would be cool. I'm like, oh, what if this happened? And then it kind of spun off on a day's work. I'd be like, ooh, something like this. And then, I could tie it in with this thing and bring these pieces in. So an event happened. It's got a name. Some players know about it, some players don't. Some people know about it, some people don't. And then since that happened, tieflings have been showing up places. Just babies, there's a baby. So that's a particular thing I've invented on top of the elven bloodlines, elven lineages for Refuge. So Dragonborn, they give their breath weapon. I do have some Dragonborn with tails and some without. Because why not? Why not have Dragonborn with and without tails? Because in the Dungeons Master Guide or Player Guide, it's like, no, they don't have tails, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, why not?
Tails are cool.
There's Tabaxi, they're cat people, they got tails. But so all peoples are there, and they're either reskinned and personalized by me, or just straight up out of the book.
Does that change anything on how the rules, the dice, the mechanics of a player playing the characters?
Not really. It's more of a flavor of your character for the story you want to tell.
Okay.
Because the mechanics have been worked and refined to balance and to be able to play. So I didn't want to futz with that too much, because you can throw something way off balance if like, oh, because you're half dragonborn, half, elf, dark elf, you can use your backstory to try to justify any mechanical change. And as a DM, you have to curb that, because it's like, yes, I understand that as a fighter, you should have amazing perception, but your wisdom is low, so you don't. I'm sorry. I know that it makes sense as a fighter that you would be able to perceive things, but mechanically, this is how it works, and I'm not going to change it because it's going to throw the balance of the game. We've done mythological history, sort of.
Yeah. We have the flood, everyone coming together.
Yeah, there's one
a war, intergalactic.
Yeah. There's one thing about the planet in history that we can go into that I haven't touched on. Right. And that is the Empire of Ashes. Hey, thanks for watching this video where we're diving into this campaign setting that I'm creating, and it's a lot. And I hope that you think it's interesting. So consider subscribing, check us out on Patreon if you want to support us, and hey, ring that bell, notification squad, where you at?
Most importantly, It's going to be more.
And be kind to yourself.
You know what? Yeah, that's a good idea.